Dave Lawrence didn't jump aboard on this initiative, the smoke control legislation, until 10 months later when he figured it was going to work. All right. The myth is R.K. Mellon and Dave Lawrence together huddled and all things were solved. A wonderful myth. I'm not about to disabuse it, except privately, but it is a myth because it was really the grouping of the business leaders working with politicians that are under the mayor and under the county commissioners that brought it about. So just to sort of repeat, run through some of the initiatives. First was smoke control legislation, next flood control legislation, the next what we call the Renaissance, which was bringing equitable life assurance, which was zeroed in by the private sector, to start the construction of some new office buildings and to clean up the point and to start to clean up our riverbanks because they were laden with industry and railroad tracks and water transportation because of the movement of bulk commodity was particularly needed by the basic industries we had. So we had in terms of initiatives, just to repeat, starting with smoke control, flood control, the first Renaissance, then moving into the Port Authority and trying to make it more efficient.
Which is our transit and transportation system. So you're going to take the T that's operated by the Port Authority of Allegheny County, which the Allegheny Conference had a hand in founding 50 years ago.
Yeah. But you know, there were mistakes made. I'm going to compare what happened in PAC with what happened with the Regional Asset District initiative. Once we put all of these transportation modes, bus companies into one, we set up ourselves up to be shut down by the unions. We did not make that mistake when we came to the Regional Asset District legislation.
The Regional Asset District is a 1% sales tax in Allegheny County that supports regional assets, including arts and culture, the parks, the libraries, and stuff.
Yeah, that was it from the standpoint. That was one of the initiatives that came along later. It had, that initiative was occasioned in many respects by the decline in the economy. We were having wonderful regional assets in terms of our park systems, our libraries, our museums, the zoo, aviary, conservancy, all looking to be backed by the city, which was losing population and tax base. So you had regional assets that were going down the chute in terms of what needed funding because the city of Pittsburgh couldn't support them all. So we got new legislation, which we had in terms of the issues involved in that legislation. What is the region? What are the assets? Who's going to run it? How are you going to pay for it? Those were the four basic issues that the conference came to grips with, and it dealt with those issues over a good 2-year period before it got the legislation. It learned its lesson from the standpoint of starting with the political elements in terms of making sure they were aware that we had a problem, bringing them in to the fold in terms of effecting some solution. We looked to get tax reform at the same time, and so that gave us a wonderful mix of bribery and extortion from the standpoint of accomplishing the right kind of things, because we had a sales tax which we finally came to use for this purpose, increasing at a point. Our sales tax, unlike so many, does have safety nets in it. It doesn't apply to food, clothing, taxes, medicine, that kind of stuff, rents, or whatever. So it had that safety net, and it was gauged to produce roughly at that time 160 million per year. Half to go to the regional assets on a formula basis, on a contractual basis, as to how the other half we split among municipal governments. Half of the other half went to the county, a quarter to the city, and the other quarter to other municipal governments based on a formula for need. We also were blessed, we did analysis through the Economy League and had a prediction that some 25% of the sales tax would be paid by persons outside of the city of Pittsburgh, outside of the Allegheny County rather, coming into the county to shop. I always thought that was kind of rough justice because a lot of people come from outside the county, outside the region, outside the state, to have the benefit of a lot of our cultural amenities, our parks, zoos, the libraries, museums, whatever. So that was...
Yeah, and to understand that, why that was so significant at the time, you need to understand a little bit about the political lay of the land here. We are, I believe Pennsylvania is the second most politically fragmented state in the United States. We have the second largest number of political jurisdictions. So there are 130 municipalities in Allegheny County, of which the city of Pittsburgh is one of the 130. And what happened with the collapse of the steel industry, because the regional asset tax was a response to that, was many municipalities lost their tax base when the mills closed and the economy shifted, and where the economic growth was happening was not inside some of these municipalities. So this idea of being able to share the tax base, spread the burden, especially the city of Pittsburgh, which had a dramatic population loss and literally lost all the steel mills inside the city of Pittsburgh, all closed. So the tax base had been lost. The city was supporting these regional assets. Everything was so fragmented that the only way that you could get the support and the investment to be able to sustain it was to come up with a more regional tax-based sharing strategy. And I know, Chuck, you were really one of the leaders in figuring that out.
Yeah,
through.
What we had at the time, I was on the board of the Allegheny Conference and championed the regional asset district. That was back in the time when we were still pretty small. I was the only lawyer on the Allegheny Conference. They really thought I was an engineer because of educational background. If they found out I was a lawyer, I probably wouldn't have made the cut.
Historically, they were only captains of industry. They didn't want any stinking lawyers on their board because it's going to be showing for clients and stuff. So he was the first one. Yeah.
Another initiative, and then I'll switch to entities, unless you have questions. Another initiative, for example, had to do with streamlining county government. Our former government goes back, if you remember, the Robin Hood tales, to the shires of England, from the standpoint, the number of our sheriff and our this and our that and our whatever really was that form of government. It needs streamlined badly. We've worked on it, headed up again by that time John Murray, headed up that initiative.
It was at the time the president became university. So the leadership comes sometimes from the corporate sector, the corporate CEOs, sometimes it's the university leadership, sometimes it's healthcare. So we're a private sector organization as opposed to just a business organization.
Exactly. So those were some of the initiatives that we had had. Another initiative that was more led by the chamber was an outfit called, organization called Dynamo. Dynamo, it could have been a compact between the 4 states of Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky. We set it up as a subset of the chamber because we needed the C6 lobbying, and the purpose of it was to raise funds to rehabilitate the lock and dam system in the upper Ohio distributaries. And it was very badly needed. I remember flying with Johnny and Senator Hines at that time, inspecting some of these dams to show how the rehabilitation was really needed. The river system up here in terms of transport of bulk commodities is critical. This method of transportation and cost per ton mile is some of the lowest. It was a big success because of the collaboration between the 4 states that I mentioned, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the public sector. And it produced something north of $8 billion to rehabilitate the lock and dam system. Those are other kinds of initiatives. Now let me switch.
Oh, well, Chuck, I do want to mention, because they're going to go out on the dock. They're going to be out on the rivers. And while you're out there, we're, I think, the 2nd or 3rd largest inland port in the United States in terms of tonnage. So
we've been the largest for a long time.
Yeah, hopefully you'll send, that was in the heyday of steel with all the coal and the commodities being moved. But the other thing to remember when you're out on those rivers is they are not natural rivers. They are completely engineered rivers that they would not be navigable even for your duck if it weren't for this network of locks and dams that have been constructed here over the last century or so. So the water level is controlled, the whole system is managed, there's a network of reservoirs in the mountains surrounding Pittsburgh that enable the entire system to function. And it really does speak to the amount of effort and thinking that's gone into making a navigable port possible this far inland in the United States.
So you can see the collaboration again between the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector. Entities.
We should open up. Anybody have any questions? I do want to talk a little about the organizational structure because I think it helped, especially today, because Chuck was a real pioneer of that. But just, yeah.
So after World War II, the demise of the steel industry was caused by what?
Oh God, that's a big topic. Do you want to take that? And really the biggest collapse happened in sort of the 70s, 1970s to early 80s was when the bust really happened. Do you want to talk about what laid the groundwork for the bust?
What?
The bust of the steel industry. I mean, because in the 50s and 60s, we were still cranking because, American Steel was building America and rebuilding the world. It got to be more like the 70s when things began to fall apart.
It changed, and there was a multiplicity of reasons why it changed. It changed in large part because the automotive industry was really going to Asia, to Japan. Steel mills were there. There were different buying patterns for carbon steel, which was the big steel produced here in Pittsburgh. And you had that kind of limitation in terms of the profitability and the capital intensity of the basic steel industry, and that was the real push for a collapse of the economy and the so-called steel bust. We responded. We responded with an understanding that the world has changed. We needed to affect some kind of change. We needed to capitalize upon our strong points, and we needed to do something to minimize the impact of our points that weren't so strong. So we looked at our resources. We looked at what we were good at, and we found out that we were blessed with institutions such as Carnegie Mellon, world leader in computer technology and IT. We were blessed with the University of Pittsburgh, the so-called wet science in terms of research for medicine, new kinds of ways of therapeutics, medical devices. We also were blessed with a good workforce. We were blessed with material science. Few people really appreciate the fact that Pittsburgh is maybe the leader in the world in terms of types of material science. We have not just the basic carbon steel, we have specialty steel, high temperature alloys, we have titanium, we have aluminum, we have glass, we have cement, we have chemicals, all this material science, and the high tech, which is normally you think about just in research in medicine or in computer technology software, the technology to produce some of these different materials, niobium, nanotechnology so far as carbon strands are concerned, what Alcoa is doing with a combination of aluminum and lithium now to produce different types of materials for wide-body jets. We took and zeroed in on what we were good at. We looked to take the technology being developed in our universities and through other organizations help their technology transfer system come up with small, new, fledgling, entrepreneur-type companies. That came out of both the wet science and it came out of the dry science from Carnegie Mellon and Pitt.
So a good example is today we have hundreds of companies in the life sciences and IT that didn't even exist 30 years ago. They employ tens of thousands of people. I think in 1979 we had about 70,000 people working in healthcare in the region. Today we have about 220,000 working in healthcare. So the investment in research in that knowledge-based economy transformed the mix of the workforce. We had more than 200,000 people in manufacturing in 1979. Today we have about 100,000 people in manufacturing. So the economy now is much more balanced. No one sector in terms of economic output contributes more than about 22% to the regional economy. Actually, financial and business services is the biggest contributor to the regional economy. We're much more a banking town than a steel town or a healthcare town. The next two are energy and manufacturing in size, and then the other two that sort of round it out are healthcare and IT. But this diverse economy was really constructed here over the last 30 years by a lot of the investment in the universities. Anybody on another question or a comment or thought or whatever? Yeah.
You mentioned, well, I've got a couple of questions. Let's see. Something you hadn't mentioned before is just what you were talking about, the different sectors of industry. And I wouldn't have thought of anything that wouldn't have come to my mind.
You have to repeat for me.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'll read
as the leader, but looking at what we do a lot in Florida is incentivize companies by offering tax breaks and for them to locate in our city or in our county. So with the expansion of some of your industry segments, how is it that companies are attracted?
Yeah, this is about incentives, and she mentioned that in Florida they use a lot of incentives to try to attract business investment. We do too. We have to play the game. I think it's probably fair to say Pennsylvania is not as liberal with incentives as the South is. It was interesting, a number of years ago, Westinghouse was looking at expanding with a new engineering center and headquarters operation, and they have a lot of land out in South Carolina. Westinghouse has a big presence down there. And so they could have done it there, they could have done it in Pennsylvania. And both states had to put their offer on the table, and ultimately Westinghouse chose to stay in Pittsburgh. And we talked to them after the fact, and they said, well, you know, the South Carolina offer was 20% better if we just look at the numbers on the straight costs. But at the end of the day, we chose workforce, and we wanted to be close to the universities in Penn State and Pitt and Carnegie Mellon and the engineering talent, and that was worth 20% on the incentive. So we do play the game, but we're not as liberal as the South is in terms of doing that. But it is part of the economic. You have to, you have to be able to play the incentive game.
Are the incentives primarily at state level or local level when they are involved?
Well, state of Pennsylvania has the biggest checkbook, Job Training Act, partnership, different types of grants and low interest loans. But there are tips locally if you're trying to direct an investment. The city or the county can arrange tax increment financing. So some of them play at the local level. We at the conference, we don't have any incentives to offer. You know, we act like the broker for the company that's in, like I'm sure you all do, or your economic development organization. You represent the company, you try to work with them, you introduce them to the political entities that they need to do business with, and then they put the incentives on the table.
But we have taken particular steps as, again, initiatives of the Allegheny Conference. We do have these 2 greenhouses, which are looked to put first stage financing for the development and technology transfers. One in technology, again, and the other in healthcare in terms of both medical devices and therapeutics.
These are 501c3 intermediaries, freestanding organizations, but they receive state funding, which they then invest in a portfolio. But the state doesn't dictate the
again, set up as an initiative of the conference. And we also spotted the fact that in terms of economic development, there was lacking in this region a particular type of financial resources. We set up a particular entity from the standpoint of strategic investment group that we raised 2 tranches of $40 million worth, and that funds were applied to have sort of bridge financing in situations where banks would not otherwise lend, so they couldn't attract institutional investors, institutional lenders. That was set up, and so we are conscious of the monetary aspects, both in terms of state incentives and private incentives, and have responded. But as Bill said, the companies that come here, the companies that stay here, are looking at the quality of life, they're looking at housing costs, they're looking at transportation, they're looking at workforce and workforce development, and that's where we have been able to succeed, again, all coming back to a collaborative effort.
Yeah, I would mention, Chuck mentioned the Strategic Investment Fund. The important thing to remember, that was 40 million, it was around to be like 70 million in the 2 rounds, right? By the time it was done. For real estate investment, all private money. It was corporations and the foundations raised the fund to be able to assist with the development. We're in the middle now of doing a new one, a new site prep fund. That's for the region. The goal is to get to $40 or $50 million of all private money, the foundations and business for the most part, to invest in infrastructure to support site development. And that's because the state's backed off. The state money is no longer as available as it was a decade or more ago. And so we decided if we were going to continue to invest in infrastructure and